Hello and welcome to Run Testers. My name's Nick. In this video we're going to be comparing the Coros Pace 3 and the Coros Pace Pro. So the Pace 3 and the Pace Pro are the two best watches in Coros's range in our opinion. They are both lightweight, really impressive sports watches that offer a lot of the features you get on more expensive and larger devices in a comfortable little package, with the Pace 3 being one of our top picks for beginners or just budget sports watches in general, while the Pace Pro is Coros's first AMOLED sports watch and competes in general with watches like the Garmin Forerunner 265. So in this video I'm going to run through the key differences between the two watches. I've been wearing both for a couple of weeks and I've tested both extensively in the past as well, and then we'll go straight into a verdict where Kieran, Mike and I will all say which one we'd buy if we were coming to choose between the Pace Pro and the Pace 3, having tested both watches. So there's a lot of similar features on these watches. Like Coros tends to have the same features throughout its entire range in terms of things like sports tracking and training analysis. You're getting a lot of very similar stuff here, but there are obviously some pretty big differences between the Pace Pro and the Pace 3, starting with the price. The Pace 3 is significantly cheaper at £219 or $229, whereas the Pace Pro is £349 or $349. Pace Pro is also a bigger watch. You've got a 46mm case, a slightly thicker case as well, and that makes it a bit heavier at 37 grams with a nylon band compared to the Pace 3 at 30 grams with a nylon band, though they are both still very lightweight watches overall. You've got similar materials used on both watches with plastic cases and glass screens, but you've also got that big AMOLED screen on the Coros Pace Pro, which is probably the biggest reason you'd look at upgrading from the Pace 3. It's a 1.3-inch AMOLED screen, whereas on the Pace 3 you've got a 1.2-inch memory and pixel display, so getting a much brighter and more engaging screen on the Pace Pro. Got the same two-button design on both, but on the Pace Pro the back button's a bit bigger and the digital dial is steel, so you can take ECG measurements, whereas it's a plastic dial on the Pace 3. They've both got the same 580M water resistance and a similar slate of sensors under the hood, things like a barometric altimeter and pulse oximeter. However, you have a faster processor on the Coros Pace Pro, which makes it snappier to navigate its menus and use things like the maps on the watch, and that is a big feature you get on the Pace Pro, which you don't get on the Coros Pace 3. Pace 3 just has breadcrumb navigation with a line and pointer, whereas you get full offline maps on the Coros Pace Pro. You've also got bigger storage on the Coros Pace Pro, which has 32GB of storage compared to 4GB on the Pace 3, which gives you more room to store things like maps and also music. They both offer music storage, although it's just simple drag and drop music files rather than connecting to any kind of streaming service. Then the last difference you'll see on paper is battery life, and you'll see that in practice as well. The battery stats depend a fair bit on whether you're using the raise to wake feature on the Coros Pace Pro or not, but even if you have the screen always on, you can get 6 days of battery life with the Pace Pro, or 20 days if you use the raise to wake feature, whereas the Pace 3 is listed at lasting 15 days in watch mode. So the Pace 3 lasts longer outside of workouts, but during workouts you get more battery life from the Pace Pro, which offers up to 31 hours of dual band GPS battery life. That drops to 24 if you use the always on screen, whereas the Coros Pace 3 just offers 15 hours of dual band GPS battery life.
So I think the biggest pulls for me on the Pace Pro over the Pace 3 lies first and foremost with the AMOLED display, which I do think makes it a nicer watch to use day to day. When I think about the smartwatch features that you have at your disposal, I know we're very, very similar to the ones on the Pace 3. I just think having that bigger screen, that color display just makes them features that I want to use on a more regular basis. You've got that full mapping support as well, which I think, as we've seen with other AMOLED watches, allows you to give you, a lot more detail in that mapping and just make some features that feel a lot nicer to use kind of day and night. I'd probably add a couple of extra things on top of that. I think the GPS performance has just been a little bit better for me in my test. There's not been a huge amount in it, and I think the Pace 3 is very accurate, but I think for me, the accuracy has just been a little bit better for me on the Pace Pro. I think the battery life as well, I think, if you're using this watch in a kind of with a raise to wake, I think the battery life is better than the Pace 3. It's got a really good standby battery mode that we've seen on all Coros watches, and I think, if you're willing to use it in the raise to wake, always on display mode, battery life is very good. But I think as I generally use it with the raise to wake, I think the battery life is very good and better for me than the Pace 3. Now, in terms of which watch I would go for, I still really like the Pace 3, and I think, from a value point of view, I think there's a lot to like about that watch. I like the design. I think the core run tracking experience is very good. I think the dual band GPS performance is good. Wrist-based heart rate monitoring is probably a little bit better for me, though I would, pair it up with an external heart rate monitor with both watches. But I think, if you were, for general runs, I think the performance has been a little bit better. it has kind of breadcrumb navigation, which for me would be enough. I just want some kind of mapping and navigation support, or I like having some mapping and navigation support, and I think having that on the Pace 3 is probably going to be enough for me. So as an all-round package, from a price point of view, I would probably still be going for the Pace 3. I do really like the Pace Pro, and there's a lot that I've liked about this watch. It's one of my favourite watches I've tested this year. But if you can live without, I would say, that kind of AMOLED display, the kind of slightly slicker software, that full mapping support, there's a lot to still like about the Pace 3. And as I said, it's a very good value watch that's still delivers in the key areas, and it would probably be the watch that I would go for, despite really liking the Pace Pro. And if I had a little bit more money to spend, I would definitely be going for the Pace Pro. But if you're looking for value, I think the Pace 3 is the one that you should go for, and that's one I would go for.
I'm going to open by saying that these are both excellent watches that I think represent good value in the whole kind of scheme of running watches. Probably the most appealing watches in the Coros lineup for sure. So I don't think you could really go wrong if you buy either. But getting into which is best, in my testing, the Pace 3 and the Pace Pro come up a pretty close match in many areas. I think the Pace Pro is a bit snappier to move around thanks to the faster processor. The big bright screen does elevate your stats, insights, and make the most of that additional mapping capability. That's definitely a step up in the experience, but it's like kind of turning left on a plane. You might not notice the difference until you've actually experienced it for yourself, and the Pace 3 is perfectly good for most runners' needs. If you've not experienced the AMOLED, you're not going to be all that bothered necessarily, but the experience is a little bit up there on the Pace Pro. On accuracy, I tested the accuracy and heart rate reliability up against a selection of rivals, including the Sunto Race S Titanium, the Polar Vantage M3. I also used various chest straps to benchmark, and I did the sort of GPS up against things like the Garmin Fenix 8 AMOLED as another benchmark. And when it came to the GPS performance, I think it was solid on both. I didn't really find that much to choose between these two. The optical heart rate can be a bit fallible on both as well. Does well during kind of easy, steady runs. Mainly during intervals it struggles, but I wouldn't say one is better than the other. Beyond the screen, the build for me is largely the same too. Both devices are a bit plastic with cheaper materials, but that does make them nice and lightweight and wearable 24/7. Pretty much the same. The Pace 3 is a smidge lighter, but I wouldn't say that's noticeable on the wrist. The screen is also a touch bigger, but again, I don't find that makes a huge difference in terms of the use on the move. It's the brightness and colour that really gives the Pace Pro the boost, not the real estate you get. Now on paper, you're also getting longer battery life in the most accurate GPS modes on the Pace Pro. And this is somewhere where I did spot a difference. In my tests, when I had the always on screen set to off, in the max GPS accuracy modes, that's using the dual frequency GPS, it used around half the battery of the Coros Pace 3. That obviously becomes less pronounced if you have the always screen on or the always on screen on. But that said, I'm not sure it's a big enough difference to make me buy the Pro over the 3. Now another area where you might be looking and thinking it's different, the extra storage for maps and music also sounds good in the specs, but the music is such a faff getting the MP3s on there that I never really use it. I don't even own music files, so it doesn't matter how much storage there is for it, not bothered by that. Unless you are, then I wouldn't worry. So then the decision ultimately comes down to whether you want that bright AMOLED screen and those offline maps. If you do, I think the Coros Pace Pro is worth the extra. It's easily the best Coros watch to buy if you're looking for a capable sports watch with a killer screen, the longest lasting AMOLED battery life going, and those better navigation skills. If you already own a Coros Pace 3 and you're not bothered about the AMOLED screen and the maps, then I don't think it's worth upgrading, even for the added ECG and that little bit of extra battery life. If you're a newcomer and the screen and maps aren't priorities, I'd probably say save yourself some dollars and go for the Coros Pace 3. For me personally, when it comes to bang for buck, I choose the Pace 3 as the better value option. If someone else was paying for it though, let's get someone else to pay for it, I think I would choose the Pace Pro.
So I've tested both of these watches a lot, and I really like both of these watches. They're two of my standouts on the market, two I would consider buying myself for sure if I was a new runner or an experienced runner. They both really offer everything you need to track your training. I've not really seen a big difference in the accuracy of these two watches. The Coros does say you've got an improved satellite setup on the Coros Pace Pro, and the heart rate sensor is designed to sit more snugly against the wrist, but I've seen very similar results from both watches when I've been testing them side by side over the past couple of weeks. And in general, throughout my testing, both watches have really impressed me on GPS accuracy. I can't really fault them at all compared to other watches out there. And the heart rate accuracy is about in line with what you expect from an optical sensor in that it's been pretty good for me for the most part, especially in warm conditions. Testing it lately in cold conditions, I've had a bit more kind of variability in the results compared to those of a chest strap, but overall I'd say both of them offer pretty good heart rate tracking, especially as they are small watches. You can really pull snugly against your wrist and get better readings, especially like I say in warm conditions. Like I say, I have been wearing them both at the same time over the past couple of weeks, and GPS accuracy I've not really seen a big difference. The Pace 3 tends to be slightly more generous when I'm doing workouts, especially on looped courses, but we're talking a couple of seconds per rep, that kind of thing, so no big difference. So I wouldn't say that would be a big reason to upgrade to the Coros Pace Pro. The big reason for sure is certainly the design though. You have got that AMOLED screen, which is a big upgrade, especially as the mirroring pixel displays you get on Coros watches aren't the brightest in general, and that's the case with the Pace 3. It is still clear enough to read, it's not a problem, but the Coros Pace Pro screen is much brighter, more engaging, easier to use on the run, easier to use off the run, and that's probably the killer reason to upgrade. I was also really worried that when I was looking at the stats on paper that the Pace Pro would feel like a much bigger watch on the wrist than the Pace 3, but that isn't the case at all. Although it is quite a bit thicker in terms of the stats, actually the way it sits on the wrist makes it feel pretty similar in thickness to the Pace 3 for me, and it's still really lightweight, and the fact that it's a bigger watch is only a benefit because you get that bigger screen. I'd say it still feels really small and lightweight on the wrist. Pace 3 feels a bit smaller, but the thickness is the big thing for me, and actually it doesn't feel thicker to me, the Pace Pro, so I would say the design is a big upgrade all round. You could say that if you've never used an AMOLED watch, and if you never do use one, you're not going to miss it at all, so you could just get the Pace 3 and never even try an AMOLED watch, then that wouldn't be a terrible idea, because it is a pretty, it's still a pretty nice screen, but certainly if you do use them both side by side, or try the Pace Pro, you will miss it, I think, if you go for the memory and pixel screen afterwards. Then battery life, side by side has been quite interesting. They've been lasting pretty much the same amount of time, so in general, if I'm running every single day, fairly heavy use with the screen always on, the Coros Pace Pro will last me 5 or 6 days. That's more like 6 or 7 days on the Coros Pace 3. However, the battery life during workouts is better on the Coros Pace Pro. So the more you train, the closer in battery life these two watches will be. So over the past 5 days, I've worn them both, having charged them both to 100%. At this point, the Pace 3 is down to 34%, and the Coros Pace Pro is down to 23%. So it's dropped off a little bit more. After the run today, they might be slightly closer in battery life again. So, but you are getting, overall quite similar results, and you always have the option to turn the raise to wake feature on the Pace Pro, which I think would push it past the Pace 3. So even though it's an AMOLED watch, I think actually its battery life is probably a little bit better in practice, because if you really want that long-lasting general watch mode, you can go to race to wake, and then during activities it does outlast the Pace 3 quite considerably in dual band or the all systems on GPS mode. So that's another reason I would look at the Pace Pro. Surprisingly, the AMOLED watch, the battery life is really good on it. And then the maps are certainly a bonus. So there are times when they're really useful, and for most of the time they're not that useful. So like if I'm just running around the streets that happen near my house, I don't really need maps to navigate or anything like that, and the breadcrumb line and pointer navigation you get on the Pace 3 is good enough to get you places. But when I went up to a trip to Paris recently, the maps on the Pace Pro were a really big benefit to make it easier to navigate those very tricky streets you get in Paris. And the same would be if you're someone who's regularly doing a lot of trail running. I'm heading up to Scotland over Christmas, we'll map out some nice trail runs, and having the full maps on the Pace Pro is an upgrade. It's not one that would be an absolutely key one for me to make me upgrade over the Pace 3, but for some people it certainly will be. So overall, it's a pretty big step up in price, but I do think the Pace Pro is worth it just because of that screen, especially if it's a watch you're going to wear all the time. It's just a more enjoyable watch to have on. Like even now, the Christmas screen I have on it is better than the one on the Pace 3, and it makes me happy to see that all the time. And while it is a fairly big jump in price, I think you are getting an equivalent jump in the quality of the watch because of that screen, and then the bonuses like the maps, and then the faster processor and extra storage I think will make it a little bit more future-proof in terms of Coros' software updates as well. That said, if you're just looking for a watch to wear during workouts only, Pace 3 will do that job really well, and you can take it off and put on, a dress watch or a smartwatch or something outside that, then the Pace 3 will be the one to go for because it is so much cheaper. And if you're just not fussed about the AMOLED display, then I would get the Pace 3, because the other upgrades on the Pace Pro are good, they're useful, especially the maps, but they're not enough to make me pay that extra amount of cash for the Pace Pro. Pace 3 is such a good watch still. So yeah, it's really whether you really want that AMOLED watch and you plan to use it all the time, in which case I do think the Pace Pro is worth the extra, and that is the one I'd get. That's our comparison of the Coros Pace Pro and the Coros Pace 3. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Please like and subscribe, ring the little bell, and we'll see you next time.